Hello, everyone. Can you hear me in the back there? Hi, I'm Anna Olsen, and on behalf of the Center for Faculty Excellence, I want to welcome all of you to this exciting noontime conversation. So the state of democracy is on a lot of our minds these days in the US as well as in other established democracies. And I'm very excited to introduce the panelists for this event who will take on the important question of how faculty can engage students with democracy in these turbulent times and going forward. So to begin, at the very far end of the table, Carol Gary Schneider is the interim director of the Civic Learning and Democracy Engagement CLDE Coalition, also president emerita of the American Association of Colleges and Universities, AACNU. This past summer, Carol and the CLDE Coalition joined AU's newly established Democracy Innovation Lab at the Sine Institute of Policy and Politics. And Carol is actually not new to AU or our center. She was the keynote speaker at the ANFERN conference in 2017. Maybe some of you remember that. And I'm very excited to welcome her back and grateful for getting to showcase some of her work as part of today's Noontime conversation. In the middle here, Tom Merrill, in addition to being associate professor in SPA's Department of Government, also being my office neighbor in Hearst, is the director of the Lincoln Scholars Certificate Program, the chair of the Civic Life Steering Committee, and the CLDE Coalition faculty chair as part of the Democracy Innovation Lab at the Sine Institute. And finally, Heather Hughes, closest to me here, is the interim dean of the Washington College of Law since July of last year, and prior to that taught commercial, corporate, and property law at WCL since 2007. Her current research concerns the impact of emerging technologies on law and the legal profession. And the panel will speak for about 45 minutes, and then we'll open up for questions from the audience. So once again, please join me in welcoming our panel.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. Tom asked that I speak to why civics now. Thank you, Tom, for that question. So, I've been teaching for 20 years, and many of us here have been teaching for a long time. And, pedagogically in the past, and as scholars too, but in the classroom in the past, we were working with, criticizing, tearing apart, shaping a basically intact liberal order. And now that liberal order is strained and frayed, such that it's very difficult to distinguish between threats to democracy or threats to the rule of law and political or legal developments that we simply don't like. That distinction is essential to a democratic system and to a rule of law. That is our epistemic charge. Knowledge of the rule of law or of democracy. What is the difference between a development that actually threatens those core values and systems for the pursuit of justice, and what is a development that you do not like? And in a context in which you have a strained and frayed liberal order under threat, people struggle, we all struggle with that distinction. We can say that, law and politics, for example, you could say they're completely collapsed or completely detached. Either way, the distinction itself is under threat, and that is a problem. For a law-based system of governance, it's a problem for civics and democracy. So when I think about civics and civil discourse, they're so instrumental now, because they are at a basic level about pain management. We're in a painful moment. There's cruelty that we are not used to seeing beyond the levels, that we are used to seeing. The frequency and ease of cruelty is prominent right now. There is human pain and there is discord. There is psychic pain. There's all manner of trouble and pain right now. And when you think about civil discourse and civics, as a lawyer and studying law, the whole point of a civil legal system and civil engagement, the whole point of a civil action is to force the deepest pain and worst harms into a framework that enables expression and exchange. And that exchange might serve as a remedy. So civics and that concept of civil discourse, it's not about being polite. It's not about setting aside pain. It's not about, just that, politeness. It is a method of engagement that can enable us to come together, recognize pain and discord and difference, and yet still think about what is common, and what will be the point of exchange between us such that we can have a coherent fabric to work with, and think about what it means to have an intact liberal order and how important that is. One thing that I think is super interesting about civil discourse, especially for college and generally college age and university students, is that it forces choices. You have a choice of voice. You're making choices about subjecthood. And as you try to make those choices as a subject engaging in civil discourse, it reveals the limits of agency, around these choices, the way we present, the way we can choose to present, the way we do not have choice, around voice and presentation and engagement. The fact that it is so abstract can make it revelatory because so many different people have to come to it. And that in and of itself is revealing about people, and about the way that they are experiencing the topic of engagement or whatever their purpose is, in coming to civil discourse. To engage in civil discourse, that is an act, it is an assertion of civic relevance. Right? When you engage in civil discourse, you're saying you are a person expressing a view. And I would not underestimate the complexity of that in a world steeped for decades now in the descriptive power of critical theory, which is incredibly powerful descriptive work, based in continental philosophy. And the legacy of that intellectual force in academia is tremendous. And yet, as we all know, it presents challenges to subjecthood. And subjecthood is what you need to assert a right that has collective meaning in a civic order, that is not collapsed with what you like or what you want, but has collective relevance. So I love this project, of Civics Now and civil life, at the university. And I look forward to hearing from my colleagues how they are approaching it and thinking about it.
Great. Thank you, Heather. I should start by, first of all, thanking everyone for coming. It's really great. We look forward to questions. I want to thank my fellow panelists for making the time to be here. I especially want to thank Anna Olson for putting this together and giving us the time. So I'm really grateful for it. I'm going to make 2 points in my comments today. One is a case for why civics is right for AU as sort of a general theme or rubric for how we think about ourselves and how we present ourselves to the world. And the other is what civics might look like at the curricular level. I feel like we've had a lot of conversations in the strategic planning process about general themes that have mostly been, if I can say this politely, an exercise in wheel spinning because there have not been very many specifics. So I want to try to say some things about what specifically it be. I am very much aware that we're in the middle of the strategic planning process. We've been through many public forums about the 5 C's, and apparently now we're going to have some more. Which of course I look forward to, as I look forward to every other committee meeting in the world. And I just have to say that what I'm saying here, I'm only speaking for myself. I have no idea where the institution is headed. I have no idea where the president, the provost, and the board of trustees, how they see all these things. So I'm just trying to say some things that, as I see it, perhaps differently than others have said then. I'm going to start by talking about why civics, I think, is right for AU as a general theme. And I want to start by mentioning some important points of context, or reminding you of some important points of context. Higher ed and AU in particular, I think, are in crisis. We're in crisis partly because the Trump administration is attacking us. But the crisis, I think, is deeper and broader than that. Here at AU, as we all know, we've been through one round of budget shortfalls last year with another round of budget shortfalls at the beginning of this year that seem to be driven largely by weak enrollment, that's a problem that I think we really have to focus on and think about. At the same time, our country is in crisis. That I do think it's fair to say that we're in a political crisis in which things seem to be going very, very badly sideways. And I think I said in one of the curriculum meetings that the country feels like it's on fire. There's a real sense of urgency about what would it mean to live in a liberal democracy in the way that Heather talks about it. So those are 2 points of background context. The fact that the country is in crisis is, I think, an opportunity for us. I have been told about 6 times every day that AU is located in Washington, D.C. I think that has long been a fundamental part of our public identity. And I think there is a real space within the American cultural landscape for an institution that says, we're not going to run away from disagreement. We're going to lean into it and affirm it and try to work through it in a productive way, in ways in which many other institutions in our country are no longer doing that kind of mediating work. I think that there's like a softball coming across the plate at us. And I also, in the curriculum conversations that have happened, for those of you who were there, one of the ideas that came up was the idea of entrepreneurship as a theme for the core. I understand why people had that idea. Entrepreneurialism. Yeah, so many faculty on this campus had about 4 days of complete terror that the core is going to be replaced with business classes, which I think is not on anyone's agenda, but I'm providing context. I understand why people propose the idea of entrepreneurialism, and I could talk about that, but I just think the fact is that forgive me for being crass, our brand is based on the fact that we're in Washington, D.C., that we are already a political place. We have long been a political place. People come here for that reason. I think it would be foolish to think that we could somehow change courses in midstream and try to go in some other direction. I think the only possible path for us is to say, well, this is the cards that we've been dealt. How do we play them in the smartest, most effective way? I'm not saying that we have done that well over the past 10 or 15 years, but I am saying that's kind of the our institutional DNA, and we need to find some way of affirming that. So from one point of view, I think civics is the big theme for whatever AU strategic plan is kind of a no-brainer. I know that my colleagues in other places, including Ford, apparently disagree with this, but that's just my take. The more interesting question is, what would a revitalized political or civic identity for American University, what would it mean to say we do have a public responsibility, and what would it mean to lean into that and to try to do that in a robust, intellectually vibrant way? I don't think the answer can be civility or politeness. I know that we use the phrase civil discourse, but I think that the implications of that phrase are that we're trying to get everyone to be friendly to each other. And it often has the connotation, some people think it has the connotation of trying to suppress disagreement. I think that moves in exactly the wrong direction for what we need. I like bipartisanship and compromise as much as the next person, but I think that's really not a theme that lands in our current cultural situation. I don't know how else to say it. I think the path for us has to be affirming disagreement, leaning into disagreement, but trying to make it productive disagreement, trying to think about, well, how can we talk about things in a way that is going to allow us to move forward, even if we can't agree? Can we act together in moments in which we don't agree about some pretty important things? That's the question for the country. I'm trying to read my... I think that we're going to have to try to find ways of dealing with the disagreements that exist in our community. There was an idea that was proposed, the civic pluralism idea that Heather and I both worked on. I don't think civic pluralism is a goal to be aimed at. I think civic pluralism is a fact about our condition, that there is just profound disagreement in the country. But more importantly, there are profound disagreements within our own community. Right? We are not all on the same page, despite what the folks on Fox News say that somehow we're some kind of monolith. And if you ever don't believe that, you should go to a faculty senate meeting and you'll be quickly disabused. So the question is, what would it be like to actually deal with disagreement rather than trying to put it under the rug? And I do want to say, for the record, I think that if we were to move in this direction, it absolutely requires strong protections for free expression, including spaces for protest on campus. That has got to be part of the world that we live in. There have to be rules. I understand that. I'm not naive. But free expression is part of the civics, as I understand it. So what would this mean on a curricular level? And to try to put some specifics on this. And I should say, I don't think that the civic push should be something that, of course, yes. Betsy, you are allowed to interrupt. Yes. Please. So I don't think our goal is to disagree. I think that we should acknowledge that we disagree and then figure out how to work through that in a productive way. And so sometimes when people say civic pluralism should be a value at the university, the response is, well, do you want to have people who believe in the flat earth theory? Or some other, let's say, outlandish or, out of the bounds point of view. And I guess I would take it slightly differently, that we already do actually disagree about lots of things. That's the fact that we're trying to deal with. It's rather than something like a moral thing that we need to affirm, it's really something that we need to acknowledge and try to figure out how to deal with. Does that make sense, Betsy? Okay, yeah, so it's complicated, and I look forward to for more conversation. I don't think that civics is only about SPA, SIS, or political science by any stretch of the imagination. I think that every other part of the university, I think what our goal is to somehow bring the virtues of the university, the virtues of liberal education, the virtue of people who are seeking truth in whatever field into civics. We're trying to elevate civics rather than simply leave civics in the fairly sad and unhappy place that it is. So I mean civics with the academic spirit is what I really mean by it. In terms of practical things that we could do, it seems to me that like other institutions in the country now, we could use a gateway course like AU Encounters as a vehicle for trying to get people to think in a civic way. And I don't have a proposal for entire curriculum, but it does seem to me that we could have, for example, a module in AU Encounters on free expression. I know for 100% fact that we do not agree about that in this community. We have many different takes on that. I think that you could take to students, I would make it a small class with a faculty member where people were being asked to actually talk about issues rather than a lecture class where somebody is being talked to. But I would present them arguments for and against free expression, strong arguments on both sides. Why is this a complicated question that people disagree about? I would give them the university policy on free expression. I would give them our statement of values. They would say, let's talk about this. And I would say, you don't have to agree with the university. If you think that there's something wrong, it would be actually fantastic if you write a paper saying the policy is wrong or that the university got individual cases wrong. I think we should welcome that kind of conversation and create spaces for it in ways that we don't currently do. But our most fundamental ask of students should be that we want them to talk the issue out. Not that they're going to persuade each other or persuade us, but that they're going to, at the end of the day, understand why people disagree. Not just random people, but smart people disagree about this issue. Or to do it, put the issue slightly differently, we want them to be able to do justice to the question. I think if we do that, if we have them talk through this issue, which everybody on this campus knows, something that we're divided about, I think that people, wherever they end up in their specific views about free expression, I think they are practicing character traits and an ethos that is really a civic ethos. You're getting them to work through how do you balance rights and responsibilities. And that is a civic thing. Even if the students don't understand that it's a civic thing, they are thinking about themselves as members of a community in which they are subjects with rights, but they also have responsibilities as part of the community. So we'll wrap up. I think that the character traits that you need to have a serious conversation about an issue like that are the character traits that you need as a citizen of a big, dissonant, conflicting democracy. And we might not be able to fix what's happening outside of us, but we can be the people that we want to be and help our students be the people that we think they should be. And nobody knows how culture changes in the big picture. what we can do is try to change the culture that we have ourselves, right? Take responsibility for ourselves, even if we can't take responsibility for other things. So that's my proposal. I'll stop there. Thanks for listening.
So how are the acoustics? Okay. Thank you. First of all, let me thank Anna and everyone for... Oh, it's not on.
Big fucking post there.
How's that? Better? Okay. So first of all, let me thank Anna and all of you for inviting me to be part of this conversation. As Anna said at the beginning, the Civic Learning and Democracy Coalition, while not new, has just arrived at AU, so I'm to some extent like your first years. Where is this building? Where am I supposed to be? And I'm delighted to have this opportunity to hear from you, to hear what you have to say on our topic. But I do want to sort of extend the foundations that Heather and Tom have laid. So Heather has reminded us that we are at a painful moment in our democracy. And if I just had to say for 1 minute how I think we engage students with the state of our democracy, I would say, I think we start by asking them what their experience has been of this democracy. What are they bringing with them? What do they assume about it as they walk in the door of AU? But secondly, like Tom, I have an abiding interest in the actual structure of the curriculum. And as the president of AAC&U, how many of you have ever went to an AAC&U meeting? Okay, so a number of you have. You understand it's committed to making liberal education inclusive for all students, that we address liberal education across the curriculum, not just in general education, not just in certain disciplines. In effect, we have a revisionist notion of it, and I brought that with me into the Civic Learning and Democracy Coalition. So I am not going to take your time by describing the coalition, but I am going to call your attention to the 3 handouts that were on your table. The coalition is described in some detail on these 2 handouts, including our new location in the Sign Institute, Sign Democracy Lab. The key thing that I want to focus on is that when we were formed in 2021, the very first thing we asked ourselves is, what are we asking people to do? It's our mantra that civic learning ought to be part of, civic and democracy learning ought to be part of every student's educational experience, and in every degree, what are we talking about? And so, for the first couple of years, one of the things we did was to work on asking and answering the question, what are the goals? What are the things we want to do if we bring civic learning with democracy engagement into the curriculum? So if you pick this up, I am not going to talk about it. Does everybody have it? I'd like to see you waving it. Thank you. Basically, there are at least 4 different movements. One's called civic. It's arguing that we don't know enough about the democracy we're part of. We need to spend a whole lot more time on how it would work, how to make it work. And we would add to the coalition, we ought to spend a lot more time on the history of movements for change, both those we agree with and those we don't agree with, because those tell us something about the levers for change within the democracy. We are well aware of the civil discourse, civil dialogue, all the debates about what to call it. In our framework, we describe it as bridge building, engaging across difference with the notion of actually forming relationships with one another of the kind that Tom just talked about, but connecting it to problem solving, to those points of pain that we are all feeling about the democracy we're living in. We're talking in order to figure out what to do, and that's one of the things that democracy is for. The third part of this, the blue piece of the circle, is the most widespread civic engagement movement in the country. For 4 decades, Campus Compact, one of our founders, and AAC&U and many, many others have been putting practical experience into the curriculum. And I understand that's a big signature here at AU. Students are out in the community. They're in internships. Everybody wants them to have an internship or a practicum to be ready for a job. We are saying they ought to be raising civic and ethical questions about what they're seeing out there in the community, and they ought to be able to bring them back here to classrooms here where faculty will talk with them, faculty and staff, talk with them about what they've seen. And the fourth, which I think is probably the most revisionist notion here, is that this isn't just general education. It's not just the first year. It's not just a gateway course that they all have to take. It's introduced in the first year, but it's reinforced in every major they're taking. Their business majors, their education majors, their
if we're an engineering school, they're engineering majors, whatever field they're in, it has ethical and public policy and civic issues it's grappling with that affect how that field is going. And every field at the moment is, of course, struggling with the implications of the AI revolution, which had huge ethical components to them. So whatever their major is, the civic and democracy questions you introduced at the beginning need to be reinforced in that major and be part of what they think it means to actually complete a major. And at the center of all this, as you see, is the students, with lots of language for it, students' purposeful engagement, that we're giving them many opportunities to ask what they would like to do to make this a better democracy. Tomorrow's democracy is our term. What would they like to do? What are the steps they want to take? And how do they rehearse some of those actions while they are students, while they're in a position to get feedback from peers, from colleagues, from faculty, to actually think through all of this? I'm aware that there's discussion in the strategic planning topics here about a civic transcript. I'm not sure transcript is the right word. A reflective portfolio, to me, is what we want to have each student leave AU with, in which he or she takes the time to say, what issues did I care about? Where did I work on them? What new insights did I gain? And how do I want to use this as I go forward, both into public life, but also into my career? So that's the framework that we're using. And the approach is captured in yet another handout. It's called a sample guided pathway from first to final year. Because part of our interest is how do you organize this in such a way that we include all students and not just those who were interested enough to show up to particular events that was offered on campus. Not just the ones to a demonstration of a civil dialogue, productive dialogue, but the ones who actually want to work through real problems. How do we make the curriculum a space for them to see how they develop the power, the agency, the preparation to help create solutions to issues that actually matter to them? And remember what I said a few minutes ago, we should have asked them at the beginning, what issues do matter to you? You know, the fact of the matter is, you could be asking that in the admissions process. What are some problems that you care about, that you want to work on as you come to AU? And that the curriculum here will be designed to create opportunities for you to work on them, so that you know that you're coming here not to park your actual interests while you get certified, but to actually advance the things that you most care about and think them through in the ways that Tom was describing. Think them through with evidence, with argument, with serious engagement, with diverse perspectives, with all the things that a good liberal education actually should provide. So how might we think about this? There's 4 components that we're recommending to what we call a guided pathway. First of all, some kind of an entry experience, a gateway experience, where students are talking together about issues they care about. A second is that how many of you are not familiar with the term high impact practices? Okay, for you I'll give an answer. So high impact practices are curricular practices that have been shown by evidence, by research, to have a positive impact on whether or not students complete, and that are correlated with evidence of deeper learning as well. So they're high impact because they work. Pretty much every institution in the country is now putting in place several of them. The first year seminar, the required writing course that isn't just one, but it's writing across the curriculum, undergraduate research, capstone projects, e-portfolios are an evidence-based high impact practice, internships, community-based learning, service learning, diversity learning, global learning, they are all part of the high impact portfolio. And what they have in common is that students do the work. We don't tell students what to think about the global situation. We engage them with work on problems related to the global situation. They are not lecture courses. When I was at AAC&U, one of my friends at Georgetown posed a session, actually did a session in an annual meeting on low impact practices, aka the rest of the curriculum. So what we are saying is that you have probably put in place high impact practices, and I know you have the required complex learning seminar here in the first year. You have the AU encounter. You have 90% of your students doing practicums. All of those are spaces to locate civic inquiry that goes beyond whatever you were able to introduce in that first course. You reinforce it by having it reverberate across the curriculum. And some of those spaces are places where you're practicing civil dialogue. Again, not just once, not just introducing it, but they're actually practicing it across the curriculum. Thirdly, you actually create connections. You bring problem-centered inquiry into students' majors. On this map, you see clustered courses. So the cluster might be anchored in a business major, but it could pull in sociology, it could pull in literature, it could pull in philosophy. The idea is to give students multidisciplinary perspectives on those problems that they want to work on, anchored in their major. And then the last notion is the idea that there ought to be some sort of integrative culminating work. Maybe it's a senior project, maybe it's the capstone course if it's really integrative, maybe it's the portfolio. There's different ways of thinking about it, but the pathway introduces, reinforces, practices, centers on problems the students actually want to work on, presumably problems related to democracy, among other things, or that you can help them relate to democracy. And there's some kind of demonstrated achievement that shows what they can actually do with a problem that they care about. So that's the big idea. And of course, we were not brought here to be your advisors. We were brought here to help propel a national movement that's already ongoing to put civic learning and democracy engagement into the curriculum. But of course, I do think about these issues when I sit in on some of the strategic planning conversations, the civil discourse one. Civic pluralism one, for example, was very informative to me. So I'm eager to hear how you might connect these issues to the challenges that you are facing as you yourselves ask and answer the question, how do we engage students with democracy's turbulent future? How do we do it in a way that counts for curricular credit? And how do we do it in a way that will make more people want to come to AU and see it as a place where they can do something that is important, that is good for them, good for democracy, and also good for their careers?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Is this working? So we have good amount of time for questions. So if you could raise your hand and wait for the microphone, because we are recording this, and then just introduce yourself and ask your question.
If you don't ask questions, we'll ask you questions.
Hi. Of course. I'm Megan Littke. I'm Director of Sustainability for the university. And you guys are hearing it first. We were ranked second today for the second year in a row by Princeton Review as a top 50 green college. So thanks to all of you. So this is obviously something we have historically done well and worked on. And as I work with students, something that obviously comes up all the time is climate denying. Not quite to the extent of flat earthers, but in the same ballpark, right? Where we're basing this on facts. So especially students who are spending most of their college career deeply embedded in the scientific process and not taking perhaps as many classes that we would traditionally think of related to civics, are suddenly forced to think about civics and science together and that intersection. And it doesn't really make sense to them, since it's like, well, these are the facts. How am I supposed to talk to people who are just saying, no, that's, that green tree is purple. And so I'm curious about where the sciences would fit into this, because I think it's such an important connection to make, that we have a pathway for students who are studying this to learn about that connection and how to tackle it in their careers, because as somebody who deals with it a lot, it can be overwhelming and frustrating. And I think they tend to think like, well, now I'm going to have to learn how to argue with climate deniers as the example. And I need to know all the facts and bring like all the receipts to those conversations. And I think they need to have a lot more tools in their toolbox to address this as they go into the world. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that kind of sticky conundrum.
I'll jump in if nobody else wants to, and I'll go back to this pathway. You'll see that it's basically a 4-year general education pathway connected to majors, but it also rather deliberately uses words like inquiry, interpretation, and science, its explorations,
on socioeconomic analysis. And the argument is that in whatever courses you're requiring for them to meet the science requirement, I'm quite confident there's a science requirement at AU, I don't know what it is, but that they are actually learning how to engage contested questions, of which you have Exhibit A, so that we're not just talking about this in a course that's called civics, we're talking about it in a course that's called science. And we are engaging them with not just why do people think this, but maybe there's somebody I don't know if there are AU students who actually don't think there's a climate problem, but if you can find them. But those who do, what's at the root of it? What's the values position that is leading some people to take the position they do? Try to actually send them out to talk to people who don't agree with this so that they are coming back informed by what other people think, and that they're developing the habit of engaging these things, not just with facts, but with sympathy. Because when something is urgently held, there's something at stake there. Now, sympathy, it may also just be naked paragraphs, as I think is some cases, but really trying to explore the why of alternative positions, not just the facts that support them.
You got it.
So your question highlights that there can be tension between our commitment to freedom of speech and pluralism and our duty as an institution dedicated to knowledge formation. And it reminds me of when President Alger had Yuval Levin back at a Civic Life event months ago. I think it was last year. And Yuval Levin said, free speech is a value of the university, but it's not the mission of the university. So if you have these students over here are chanting 2 + 2 = 3, and those students are chanting 2 + 2 = 5, you have to support their right to say that. But the mission of the university is to get them to know that 2 + 2 = 4. I think acknowledging that tension is important because, we do have a lot of academic freedom, and there's a lot of power in the pedagogical charge. Like, you can let them say whatever they want, but you can also offer a course in which they are responsible for learning certain scientific principles. And if they don't learn them, they fail. They do not receive credit in exchange for their tuition dollars. Balancing that, the curricular and pedagogical imperative with the role that speech plays, both in the learning process and in just running an institution in a democracy with First Amendment rights. Being explicit about those tensions, I think, can be one way to start to process that.
So I want to say something because I think it's a profound question, and I think really points to the need for some kind of civic sensibility, even in the sciences. So it's not simply like we can study politics over here and there's science over there. And I think, one thing that Carol said, I definitely think there's some students on our campus who we would call climate deniers. I think we are an institution that reflects the country. We're called American University, for crying out loud. We're in Washington, D.C. If there were not conservatives here, I would be really, really surprised. And so I guess the question is, how do you handle something where you think the person is really fundamentally off base? And I guess the best thing that I think we can do as an institution is, of course, in a classroom situation, people can fail exams. They say things that we think are untrue. Like, that is part of the epistemic authority of the institution. And if we're afraid to use that, then we're way off base. But as a general cultural thing, it seems to me, trying to understand why is this opinion being firmly held by the people who hold it, and also trying to enter into the conversation not with a point of view of I've got the facts and you better listen, damn it, which is often, to be frank, is often the way that DC people handle things. But would be to say, look, I'm interested to know what's your evidence. And to say frankly, I think your evidence doesn't hold up. But to enter into a kind of I'm here because I'm trying to understand the question, I think that would go a longer way towards building trust, which I think is the underlying thing that's has failed. We're understanding what are the reasons on the other side. So for that particular issue, absolutely, you should have a section in your class. Why do people say that climate change isn't happening? Or what I think is more often the case, the costs of doing something about it are so great that they would destroy other things that we think are important. That is absolutely something you should build into the curriculum and not act like, well, those people who say that, we're embarrassed to talk to them. Because at some point you're saying that about half the country and you get what you get, right? I think that's not a good place. So thanks for the question.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Kristen Wall. I'm with the Polarization and Extremism Research Innovation Lab. And my question is around digital literacy, media literacy, which I see is included as one of the high value skills in this Every Student Every Year guide. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about any conversations or discussions within the coalition around how it's envisioned that is integrated into the curriculum, not just, including, personal digital literacy, but also analysis of the ways that technology and, social media, things like that have impacted civil discourse and politics.
Well, that's almost a question I'd like to bounce back to you. One of the things that can you hear me? One of the things that we were excited about when the coalition moved to American University was the fact that Carol was here, and we know that you have developed all kinds of tools for that. My own kind of superficial answer would be you're requiring them to take communication courses or writing courses. I don't know what you call them. This is the place where they should be working on the strategies of discovering disinformation, spending some time on the results of being sucked into extremist circles, which I know you work on. But you probably have thoughts too, so tell us what you think we should do. Yeah, you need the microphone back.
The tricky panelist tactic is to...
The room is full of people who know a whole lot about this subject.
I don't know if I have immediate solutions at the moment, but I'd love to continue the conversation. We do, have resources. We start as early as, K through 5 in introducing digital literacy and starting, it's the water that children swim in without realizing it, in the way that online, not only content, but also dynamics influence the way people think about communicating with one another, self-conception and conception of the other. And so this is an area that I don't have a lot of information on, but I'm curious to the extent to which, courses integrate analysis of the way that, that digital discourse influences. We talk a lot about online action and discourse influencing, IRL in real life, student life on campus, but I would be interested in discussing ways we could potentially develop curricular tools or guidance on integrating those kinds of dynamics into curriculum and into analysis.
I think this is an opportunity we should be working at a...
Yep.
Yeah. I'll come up and speak with you afterwards. That'd be great.
Tim Ferber, you had your hand up.
Oh, I thought you were pointing something. I have a very narrow question about a course that I teach rather than a curriculum. Taught it for a long time. It's called Ethics and Lobbying, and Tom has been a speaker in it, discussing what is in the public interest. Excellent lecture. I don't know exactly what my question is, but let me just describe what goes on. We teach the law, we teach norms, and we teach current actions that are going on, and they all have to write a paper about some phenomena that's going on. And I've had discussions in the class judging Trump's actions and as illegal, unconstitutional, unethical, and other students in the class that see no problem in all of that. And sometimes it gets kind of tense. So this is a practical question. When it gets tense, some of the people, most of the class disagree. Some of the people that have that shut down. And so the question is, it's not an assignment to go on with the discussion. It's in relationship to a lecture or to a paper that someone is presenting. Very basic thing. I've been teaching a long time, since 1966. So I've seen all kinds of things, but this is a year you were born, Jim. Yeah, right. And I guess I can use the name of an individual if he wouldn't mind. Lowenkowski was in one of my classes.
The great Corey Levin.
Yeah, Corey.
One of our alums that we
and he disagreed with people who are strong enough, to just, not about Trump, but, the long time ago. I have people like that in the class.
Just to be clear, this was before he worked for the Trump administration or the Trump campaign and was fired.
He was a student.
He was a student, right?
Now he works, in the administration, that, for Homeland Security. But back to the point. I don't always know how to handle that. To have civic, pluralistic discourse when the class gets really tense back and forth. It's a very narrow question. It's not a global question that you all are addressing for curriculum. But I want some help because I'm teaching it again this spring. I have a grant to teach it. It'll go on forever, maybe. And so help me out. How do I get the class not to pick on the person that's on the far right or the far left?
I just want to, I do not have a solution. I'm gonna let Tom give the answer to this.
Yeah.
But I just want to corroborate the question because, I speak to a lot of alums of Steen and alums from decades back. And on numerous occasions, alums still tell me about how when they were sitting in constitutional law, this is like in 1979, and they said something positive about the Warren Court and their classmates shut them down and they're still mad about it. And that's why they've not engaged with the school, or that's why, so like I hear this from the alumni base from way back. Like, so it really is an important issue. How do you shape these experiences? Because I can tell you that they leave a big impression on our students. I hear about them from all sectors of the alumni base decades after they've graduated.
And I'm getting emails about that too. Like,
So I have 2 points. Well, not to no, there's no solution. But I want to say 2 things. So one is, Jim, I think you really, in some ways represent this for me. There is a side of DC that existed for a long time that was much healthier about these kinds of issues than the place we are culturally right now. Right? It was kind of like, well, there are people who disagree about politics. We're all professionals here in DC, and we kind of understand each other, that we're doing a job. And that there was kind of more of a sense of respect and ability to talk across party lines that I think that we've really lost. And so partly when I'm saying that we need to,
maybe not during the Vietnam War.
I understood, or during the 1850s or lots of other times, but there is like a people who do politics professionally understand some things about the world that other people don't. Right, and one of those is that the endemic character of human disagreement and the fact that we can get on. So I just want to say that there is something when I say we need to think about civics as AU's thing. It's not something that's completely new, and it's not trying to redo everything in the institution. It's trying to get us to remember something about ourselves that is still there. So that's one thing. In terms of the class thing, I think so. You can't control how students are going to react to each other, and that's kind of the underlying thing. In relationship to the last question about the internet, if we could just shut down Yik Yak, we kind of after your culture, that the anonymity is really a problem. But I think the thing for you as an instructor, of course, you need to have tactics that if conversation is going off the rails and people are starting to yell at each other, it helps to have a common thing, like whatever your text is in the class, to say,
like a break.
Like a break, or just to say, like, hey, what's happening on page 4? Like, can we go back to that? Like, that's your job as a teacher.
I do that, but this is a very specialized research seminar. You know it, and what I worry about are the people who said something and they just shut down for the rest of the time. For the rest of the class, and that happens.
Right. I think you have to, as an instructor, you have to be willing to talk to the people who are getting shut down and understand where they're coming from. I think that makes a big difference.
I do, but still, it's a problem. Especially when people think that, and my bias is that he is acting unconstitutionally, unethically, and all of that. It comes out of my lectures. But they have presentations from other people like you that, hey, moderate that a little bit of,
I think the best thing you can do is be frank, say this is what I think, but I want to hear what you have to say, and let's have an exchange.
right.
Obviously, that did not work in the case of 411 Dowski.
Well, he came in with truth as a freshman, and he didn't listen. My wife taught him also the same way.
Sorry, we won't hold you responsible.
I'm not getting a real answer beyond what I'm already doing. I thought you'd give me a gem that.
Do you have norms for debate in your class?
Do I?
Yeah.
I set a norm, sure, and talk about respecting each other, and I call on people who are not saying something after they do this and they shut down. But usually the people who are really way out there on the left and right, then they keep going. Then they get shut down. You want this? So it was a bad question. Because
A bad question is just, one that we...
I think it's a great question, actually, and I deal with the same in my comparative politics class. I was going to say one more thing you can do is have a statement in your syllabus that you can return to and then have it in writing, because that gives a little more, if not a contract, at least something you can refer back to and remind them of.
I do that all. Have no fair crack.
You might just have a difficult.
You got a job I did. But right now, that's in January. But everybody got trouble with great. That's involving too. The shit, right?
Hi, Sunyata Curry. I'm the program coordinator for the Lincoln Scholars Program. I'm also a graduate student. I guess my question kind of is, I always feel like I went to a public school on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. The word civics was never directly mentioned. I might have been getting a civic education and didn't know it. But now that I always feel like people are talking about civic education as we have to bring it back. And I think it's kind of a two-part question. Where did it go? I'm genuinely curious what happened that caused it to not be a mainstay of something that I feel like we all kind of agree is so important for citizens to have all together. My second question is, how do we explain civic understanding and this style of learning to students? How do we earnestly get them to understand that this is something that is important for them, whether they be a philosophy major, want to be a doctor, etc.? That's kind of my two-parter.
You know about that? Yeah, how just got, I said, come say no.
As you hopefully know, from the time universities were first started, and certainly from the founding of the Republic, they declared their determination to prepare people for leadership roles so we could sustain it, a republic. And that continued right up through the 1947 6-volume Truman Commission report on higher education. Had 3 principal goals for higher education, and they were the fuller realization of democracy in every sphere of life, international cooperation and understanding, and bringing trained intelligence and social imagination to the solution of public problems. The word job did not appear in that top 3. That was 1947, and only a small fraction of Americans went to college. And as we, in effect, massified the enterprise, the interest in creating the kind of context that Tom would like us all to have, where we're actually looking at core text in small classes and discussing our responsibilities to one another, that becomes harder to afford, and people do not make the effort to afford it. And then, thanks to the protests over the Vietnam War, campuses were blowing up. Ronald Reagan, as governor of California, literally said, "I don't think we could afford all this intellectual curiosity," before he came to D.C. And of course, the first move he made when he got there was to try to shut down the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities, not the only sources of civic learning, but important sources of civic learning. And today, what do they tell us? We're spending 5 cents for every $50 billion we're spending on science, something like that. I've forgotten the actual. Yeah, okay, and then in addition, and I don't think it was so much because of the Vietnam War, but because of the intense focus on careers, the economy, getting a competitive economy, beating the Soviets, etc. Civics just fell out of style in the public schools. And I was astounded to discover when Sandra Day O'Connor founded iCivic how many states no longer required what I had had as a student myself, which was, in addition to 4 years of history, a required half-semester course that was on the government, that the only civics training I actually formally ever had. But those fell away, and so there's been a big effort to try to revive it with K-12, which is only, I'd say, half succeeded. And until the last 3 years, that's all if you said civics, people assumed you were talking about school. The notion of college, civic, and democracy learning, the CLDE, really not on anybody's radar screen until, of course, suddenly the nation discovers that having neglected democracy at all levels for a long time, it's in trouble. So there is now a surging effort to try to bring it to college as well. But that's my history of what happened. We wrote an article on it if you'd like to read it.
Hi everyone. Hi, my name is Gustavo Ribeiro. I'm on a faculty at WCL. I have a question. It's kind of like a follow-up from Jim's question. For most of us, the time where we engage the most number of students is when we're teaching, right? And I wonder, what are some best practices or what you guys been thinking about in terms of where you have to teach something that is in their syllabus and something really important happens related to democracy in the world. And it's kind of like a damn if you do, damn if you don't. The students kind of want to hear from the professors what, especially at the law school, but I assume, other parts of the university as well, what is their opinion on what's going on. And if you don't do that, then they're disappointed. If you do, you risk generating potential, hot debate and alienating some students. Some often struggle. Something else happened, like, and I teaching obscure doctrine in my legal course, and do I stop a couple of 10 minutes at the start of the class to talk about the latest thing Trump did, or who got killed now, or whatever? How to engage students about important issues of democracy in classroom?
Yes. So I complicated feelings about it. I mean, students, when they want to talk about something, you should generally talk to them. But my feeling is that, at least within SBA, and now I'm going to criticize SBA after I think Jim before, we're often so far focused on things that are very, very much happening in the present that, like the line between what we're doing and what's happening in the world is unclear. And I personally feel, both for myself and I think also for the students, it's really important for us to say we're doing something different than what's happening on the front page of the Washington Post. That students need a kind of refuge or kind of an enclave. That if your mind is all about what's happening on the front page of the Washington Post, at any time in human history, you'll go insane, right? And so I think it's important to be able to say, look, that's important, but we're also doing something that's important here. And oftentimes we faculty have been like, whatever happens out there, and so everything has to stop for that. But that's kind of the problem of our culture right now, is that everything is about the present and nothing is about trying to get some perspective. So I would push back a little bit on the idea that you have to talk to them.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's it can always be tricky, especially when something is really consuming the students, right? So that's where their brain space is. And you're like, do I just go where their brain space is, or do I try to redirect them or override that brain space with what I had planned to cover today or what we need? So there is always that balancing between, the imperative of your curriculum and what's going to be on the bar and what you actually have to cover and what's going to keep them in the room. Because, as we know, they will check out and engage with what they want to. So I like Tom's idea that, redirecting them back and maybe pointing out the relevance of some of the things you're teaching in the course to whatever they're thinking about, even if it's on an abstract level. But I find it difficult. It's challenging when students ask our opinions. I'm teaching undergraduates for the first time at Kogod right now. They're fascinating. It's awesome. They ask me all kinds of things. It's a business law course. They're like, what do you think about Diddy's sentence? You know, like, oh, okay. You know, what do you think about this shutdown? You know, and I, you know, so like those kinds of things are easy because they're not, you know, you can just be like, okay, or think back to the course material. Right. Anything law. They're like, I apparently have the authoritative opinion, which is great. They're so fun to teach. But I do think there can be some line drawing, you know, and sometimes you just have to say, you know, I'd love to engage with you about that another time after class, office hours, but this time is now, and this is our responsibility now.
But sitting here, I have a lot of history behind me of thinking about my former husband taking a course on social ethics at Harvard Graduate School and being informed that they wanted to talk about the ethics of the Vietnam War, that his faculty member was not a specialist on Vietnam and therefore could not apply social ethics to the Vietnam War. And that's a long time ago that this was said, but my former husband and I both still remember it. So I would have a slightly more complicated suggestion. I think that any course has got to have built into it times to debate contested issues. I think at this point, if we're teaching knowledge, they ought to know we're making ourselves obsolete because it's things to which we don't know the answer that we're giving them an education. So there has to be something in your course where you're actually debating contested issues, and probably there is. And then you have some rules of the road about this. And even if maybe you think it's important enough to actually stop the class war, but even if you don't, you say, picking up what Heather said, we're going to discuss, we'll have an office hours to discuss this for people who want to. And when we do, it will not be me giving you my opinion. It will be us bringing together the best evidence we can find to deal with this issue, so that you're setting some norms for bringing evidence into the analysis of whatever the latest outrage is. Or, in some cases, I'd have to say a lot of the things that your students are probably bringing up, Heather, I don't know anything about. I just have to say so they can talk about it without me.
Hi, I'm Sherry Williams. I'm an associate professor in the School of Communication and the Journalism Division. And I'd like to really respond to what you were saying. So I do teach about what is happening in real time in society, and I just connect it to what is already being taught. So a really good example is, I guess that was last month when Charlie Kirk was killed. So a week before he was killed, the following week, we were talking about political economy, spiral of silence, and the corporatization of media, and how all of that has an impact on what we do and what we don't hear. And that's when I was able to bring in information about Jimmy Kimmel, about the Next Star, the corporatization and the corporate takeover, and really talk about like the power that the FCC has and the way that the FCC was abusing that power. So I don't think we have to just necessarily not pay attention to what is happening in society. I think we have a duty to teach about, to make these connections from the past and the present, because if we don't, then I think we're really failing our students. And people came here to DC to learn about how the past is connected to politics and what we're living and experiencing today. And that's what I do a lot in my class. I teach a class this semester called Identity, Power, and Misrepresentation. It is taking a lot of effort for me to basically transform the class every week because there is so much that is happening. But if I don't do that, I feel like I'm failing my students, because there are real life examples that are happening where I can say, see, this is an example of political economy. This is an example of spiral of silence. You know what I mean? And if we don't do that, I think we're failing our students. So I don't think that you have to just completely throw away what you're doing. And I don't think you have to completely ignore what's happening in the news right now. But if there is curriculum that you already have, you can definitely make connections to it. Because I think that is what resonates with students, when they can see how the past connects with the present.
We still have some time. Any other questions, comments? Yeah.
Martin.
Hi, everybody. Martin Oliver, AU course. Sorry, I had to join late. I was just teaching Wendell Berry to our first year students. The essay we were reading is called Education for Home Defense. And he's got a lot of interesting things to say in that very short essay, but in particular, he says that the problem with a lot of education today is that it has become weaponized for career development, and that this is in direct contradiction to its actual aim, which is to serve. He defines service as service to one's community quite specifically, and so I see how education for democracy and democratic engagement is a direct service. But at least in Barry's terms, he sets this up as an opposite pole to the career training that is so often the aim, result, articulation, justification for cost, what have you, of higher education. So how might we, like now, as we're sort of talking about the importance of democratic engagement, how do we like grapple with at the same time these expectations from our administration, from our students, and from our enrollment, and from retention, and all those kinds of things to be like, yeah, what's the point of this place?
So that issue is even more pressing in a world in which you have to pay on paper close to $80,000 a year, and that there's a lot of anxiety among students about that. That's a real thing. I would go.
Education is free. In the essay, he's like, I get that there's tuition in books and they have a cost, but actual education is free, which he pairs in like. Anyways, but the students keep attention right away, and it's there. Yeah.
I mean, there's that great saying that people used to say that never let your schooling get in the way of your education, which you often learn more in random places, in jobs and in, whatever than you do from the official curriculum. That's important. But Mark, I would be a little bit more radical than the way that you said it, in the sense that, I mean, he's still saying education is for the sake of service for political obligation. I think that education is for the sake of itself. I think that the this is perhaps something that our prospective students do not agree with. But I think that the life of the mind is, in a way, the goal, right? That the point of the university is a place that creates a framework in which that thing can flourish. And so I think that's different than say, because I think that account of what education is for, if you think education is for careers, it's going to distort it. But also, if you think that it's for, I'd say this, even civics, it might distort what the thing is. So
as I said before, the mission of AAC&U was to, it's more complicated now, but basically make liberal education the foundation of the educational purpose and institutional fact, was my favorite version of mission. And I would say, from the time that the association I headed was founded, up until this century, it was part of the fight to position liberal education to develop the self, develop the sense of service against careers and vocation. Guess what? You lost that. 70%, maybe 80% of all students are choosing fields to study that, in their minds at least, are connected to careers. Now, we may say your careers are going to change, jobs are changing, we say all those things. The fact of the matter is that we spent years persuading people that liberal education was the opposite of career preparation, and this is not a good thing to have done. This is not a good thing to have done. And it's in that spirit that I bring to you and spent a lot of time with AAC&U articulating that a liberal education is the best and most powerful preparation for the careers you want to have, because it brings you all these capacities you need to solve tough problems that you'll face in your career, to be an innovation driver in your career, and to bring civical and ethical responsibility to your career, so your only job is not to just have the fastest, most profitable route to wherever you're doing, but that you begin to take into account its impact on society, on people, on the kind of community you want to live in. So better prepared for careers, not the antagonist, opposite of careers. It is my strong recommendation to AU. I don't think you can sell the idea that you're coming here not to prepare for careers, because people need jobs. They do. And we want them to have to make more of the work they'll do because they were here than they would have if they owned something.
What a great way to end. Shall we? Any final questions? No? All right. Thank you so much.
That's good. Yeah.